Bore da, Ian. Can you tell me your name, full name, and where you live?
My full name is Ian Jeremy Lomas Tillotson, and I live not far from Tregaron. Name of the house is Coed, and it lies adjacent and overlooking Coscaron.
If I can start by asking you, how long have you lived in the Tregaron area?
I came here in 1976. So you can do the maths.
So you've lived here quite a long time, haven't you?
Yes.
What brought you to this part of Wales?
I came with my job. I worked as a warden for the Nature Conservancy first, and then the Nature Conservancy Council in South Devon, and I was appointed here as Chief Warden, responsible for overseeing the management of the National Nature Reserves in the southern half of Wales.
So how easy was it to settle in? Because you came from, remind me where you came from again?
I'm a Yorkshireman.
Yeah.
And I came from Devon. I was working in Devon for 7-8 years before I came here as a warden responsible for the management of the nature reserves on Dartmoor. That was my job there, and I was promoted to Chief Warden and came here to undertake that job and purpose.
And you came on your own, or?
No, I brought my family with me. I have a wife and 2 daughters, both of whom were educated here. Not entirely, they did some of their primary school in South Devon. So we moved here as a family.
So coming from Devon to the Cambrian Mountains, were there any differences, challenges, or situations that...
the challenges, the professional challenges were huge. Sorry about that interruption there. The professional challenges were huge. I had been responsible for a small group of nature reserves on Dartmoor, and now I came to an area where I had a much wider responsibility for nature reserves of many different kinds throughout the southern half of Wales. The challenges socially, yes, there were some, of course. I was moving to an area where I didn't speak the language. This is not my first, Welsh was not my language. My daughters, however, also non-Welsh speaking, faced their education in a bilingual sense, and they learned the language much more readily than I did. I've spent my life being a lousy linguist, I'm afraid. But they moved away from the area, and I guess that they have lost that skill and ability now.
So you mentioned your children, you mentioned your wife.
Mm-hmm.
What did she do when she arrived here with you?
She worked also for the same organisation, but in an administrative capacity, partly as a secretary to myself, working from home, and partly in the admin department in our local office in Aberystwyth.
And you mentioned you lived in a house overlooking Coscaron.
Yes.
What kind of experience is it living over a national nature reserve? Tell me about the day in a life of looking over a national nature reserve.
Well, for someone with my interests, which is my interests have always been in wildlife, I think from childhood. So becoming first a warden for the Nature Conservancy was a big step in my aspirations for my life. Then coming here and living on the side of Coscaron meant, of course, that I could pursue my passion and my interest in a private capacity through the medium of the reserve, as well as through my work in a wider context in the Cambrian Mountains and beyond.
Yeah. So in terms of living over Coscaron for all this time, what changes? What have been the significant changes?
This would take much longer than our interview period, I'm afraid. One thing that has happened because of my location is that when I retired, I retired in 1999, so I've been retired for 24 years. I still have a passionate interest in the management of that nature reserve, And because I overlook it, on retirement I retained an appointment as an honorary warden, later demoted to voluntary warden. That meant they didn't pay me £300 a year. It was a little more than that for a time. So I have kept an eye on that reserve, a very critical eye from time to time, and especially in recent times when resources have been reduced, when staffing has been reduced, and when the management there has been conducted largely by contractors, not by, can I use the word, professional staff. When I worked for the Nature Conservancy Council, Countryside Council for Wales, I never worked for Natural Resources Wales. They came into being after my retirement. But I had a team of people working down here, and I had another teams of people working elsewhere. It is now reduced to a single man working half a day a week. So I hope that they find my presence there of value and of interest as I overlook the reserve on a daily basis.
I'm sure they do, because you are famous for being the warden of Coastal for many years, and any mention of your name is linked to this magnificent natural resource which we have as the legacy of the last ice age.
Indeed.
Can you tell me a little bit about the nature you've come across on Coastal over the years?
Yes, nature on a raised bog or any nature reserve is many and varied, and my one point of interest, particular interest and particular discovery, I suppose, was the discovery of a medium-sized moth. Not of interest to many, perhaps, but one that had been declared extinct in Britain in the 1860s. Its type locality are the Norfolk Broads. It belongs to the wetlands over there. It was never known in West Wales. This is not its habitat. But within 10 years of its discovery and description in the 1860s, it was declared extinct in Norfolk and Suffolk. 100 years later, it was discovered on Cosfochno on the coast, which was also part of my responsibility, in the 1960s, just about 100 years later. It was discovered on a nearby railway station. I'm not sure whether it was Borth station or not. I came here in 1976 and discovered it here, to which the entomological lobby of the day said, "Are you sure?" They didn't quite call me a charlatan, but they were not far from it. Because, they said, the only known food plant for that insect does not exist on Coastal. So I held up my hand and said, there is a specimen of the rosy marsh moth which I discovered, I took from that reserve. So the conundrum then that existed for 17 years, 18 years, was what was this creature living on? Nobody knew. Its food plant wasn't a Coastal. Actually, we have discovered a small plot of it since then, but it's not living on that food plant, it's living on something else. And it took me all that was known of the caterpillar, of the larva of this moth, was that it was thought to be nocturnal, like its parent. It was thought to be sensitive to vibration, and it was thought to be sensitive to light. So I spent 17 futile years in the middle of the night during its active period, crawling about on my hands and knees on Coastal, not looking what I was looking for, not knowing where to look for it or on what to look for it, but knowing only that I was probably disturbing it with my light and with the vibration, at which point it would fall off its food plant and disappear into the vegetation. In 17 years I never found it, and it took several trips to Eastern Europe, a couple of trips to Japan, and then my Churchill Fellowship, which took me across Siberia, to learn that in 2 places in the world it fed on something else. One in Japan on a tiny little bog on Hokkaido, and on Coascaron. And on both of those locations, it was feeding on the same something else. So the conundrum, though we've discovered what it feeds on, the conundrum remains. And some sort of evolutionary quirk has dictated that it has evolved to live on the same food plant in two places at opposite sides of the planet. I've had it checked to DNA level, and it is the same species precisely. Not a subspecies, not a variety, the same species precisely.
Do we still have this moth here now?
Yes.
So
it's a very precious resource. It's here. I have been very critical. From time to time I have been critical of the works that are going on, have been going on for the last 3 or 4 years, and are still going on the reserve at the present time, because in my simple view they're turning over too much of the surface in order to retain the water. The principle of what they're doing is sound. The practice is too much too soon. We began working on Coascaron more than 40 years ago, doing the same kind of thing. And when people said to me, "What are you doing?" I explained, we're retaining the water level at the water table as at high a level as we possibly can in order to keep the bog as wet as we can. And my invitation to them all was, well, come back in 50 years and we'll show you some fresh, new, growing raised bog. What the present project has been doing is trying to achieve that in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. And in trying to achieve it, and they are achieving it, I think they are causing too much disturbance too quickly. I think the work that they're doing should have been done over 150 years and not in.
So it's technically letting nature do what nature does, really.
Yes, it is providing encouragement if nature needs encouragement. Initiative, no, that's not the right word. Encouragement will do to nature to get on and do it, and it will work. My fear is that where we have discovered most of the rosy marsh moth is an area which has been very, very severely turned over. My monitoring of the next few years will reveal whether that has been damaging to this insect or not. And if it has, this will be a tragedy. It will recover, I feel quite sure. So it's not a permanent problem.
Clearly you have a passion about moths.
Yes.
And I've never been so excited about the word moth until today and hearing that story of this discovery. If you could recommend a time of year and a time of day to go to Coascaron to a visitor, for example, what time of year or when should somebody visit Coascaron?
Well, in the first place, they would have to do it at night because moths are nocturnal.
Well, what I mean is, in terms of nature in general,
yes,
not just moth spotting.
Okay.
If we could recommend that somebody goes to Coascaron, somebody who's staying locally or even a local resident, when should somebody go to Coascaron to see nature and the nature reserve at its best?
You could almost say throughout the year in answer to that question, but in reality I would suggest this month until I looked out of the window. May and June would be perhaps the best months. During July and August you've got a plethora of biting insects which makes it uncomfortable. The flora is at its best perhaps during July and August. But for the more mobile wildlife, the birds, the insects, and if you're very, very lucky, the odd mammal, perhaps May and June would be the best months. But in answer to your question, the summer months. Having said that, come in the winter sometimes and you'll find birds here in the winter which are not here during the rest of the year.
You might be familiar with the big five of the safari in Africa, for example.
Indeed,
the elephant, the giraffe. I know you visited these parts of the world as well. What would you say are the big five of Coascaron in terms of what to look for, what to possibly and hopefully see? You mentioned your moth, so
yes.
that I would say that is in that big five category?
Because of its rarity, yes, it would be, though of course it's very difficult to see because it's nocturnal. So you need to be there at the right time of the year to do that, and that, as it happens, is early August. Or it's on the wing for no more than 3 weeks of each year. It comes, it becomes adult, it breeds and it dies. That's the way it is with insect life. But among the others, the red kite obviously is local. But among the birds, you'll see buzzards. We are now attracting 2 coarse caron egrets. Little egret has been seen for many years here, and very, very recently, I've seen them flying past my kitchen window. We have great egret on the bog. So this is perhaps an indication of, dare one use the word, climate change, and what is happening to wildlife across Europe, moving slowly north as the climate warms, which it clearly is doing. We don't have the severe winters of yesteryear. But among the smaller birds, there are many, many smaller birds. Incoming warblers during the summer, grasshopper warbler you can listen for, it's a delightful sound, willow warbler, sedge warblers and so on, these smaller birds. And at this time of the year, in the little bit of woodland around my house, I attract pied flycatchers and red starts. They're not so frequently seen on the reserve itself, but in the woodland fringes they'll be found. So there's a lot, and among the mammals, not so easy to see, but we do have otter here breeding on the reserve. They are elusive, but you may be lucky if you're walking close to the river to find them here and there. I was doing my survey work on the Rosy Marsh a few years ago in August, and I saw a movement some distance from me, and I stood still, and a very large otter, I suspect a male otter, came up towards me, and it squatted, I think is the right word. It certainly stood there for a while, no more than 5 or 6 yards distant from me. It looked me up and down. I looked at it. I didn't move very much. It showed no interest in me whatsoever, and it turned and went on its way. A wonderful moment for anybody interested and recognising the elusiveness of these animals.
Yeah, I just wished you could press a little button as he went as he went to Coast Caron, and you could choose what you could see, because a lot of these things are there. A lot of these animals are possible to see. It's the time and the patience and clearly the time of year when
Yes.
you need, and time of day, of course, that you need to be there looking and watching and waiting. What about community life? You came here for the purpose of nature, and you mentioned the fact that you didn't speak Welsh and you came to a Welsh-speaking community. What about, how did you integrate, or how did you get involved with community life in the Tregaron area?
It took me a long time to do that, and the reasons for that I don't think had anything to do with the local community or the culture or anything else. It was because my several roles kept me away from home for very, very long days. During my working life here, I also filled the chair of my union, which meant that I spent a lot of time attending meetings in London or Peterborough or in other offices up and down the land. Excuse me. And my days sorry about that. Well, my days, even working within my area, required that I attended meetings in Bangor or Aberystwyth or Cardiff or various other places. So I had very, very little time during those early years to actually mingle with the community very much at all. In retirement, however, I have done so, and I have enjoyed doing so enormously. I became part of the community. I still don't speak Welsh. As I said, I have been throughout my life a lousy linguist, and though I did make a valiant effort on arrival here, shortly after arrival here, for the reasons that I've just explained, I was simply unable to maintain attendance at classes to learn Welsh. What I regret deeply is not enrolling in the course in Lampeter, which some of my colleagues did, which take you away for a fortnight and make you speak nothing else. That would have been of enormous benefit, and I do regret that deeply. However, community life has been a very important part of my life in the last 20 or 25 years. I've involved myself with community affairs. I think I've been welcomed most times. I've been chairman. I succeeded you as chairman of the walking club, and I'm still very active with that. And I'm now very active, more active than I can find time to be, with what will be a very valuable asset to this community in the long distance Tybee Valley Trail, which we hope will be inaugurated, later on this year.
Tell me a little bit more about the walking club if you can, and then maybe lead into how the walking club activities over the years, and we're talking 20 years here now,
yes,
how that has led into the beginnings of the Tybee Valley Trail.
The walking club has been very active and has been very, very, very well attended under your chairmanship and mine over these 20 years. We've attracted people from many parts of Wales, and indeed further afield than that, over all of these years. I think we went into a period of the inauguration of any club will always attract a lot of people. And I think we did have a membership in excess of 100 in the early years. That declined a little. We changed some of our policies, some of our practices, although of course the main one is still walking. And we now have a steady membership of 60 or 70 or so people. We walk monthly, plus a few. The walks are presently very well attended, regardless of the weather. We've had some really awful days recently, but still the stalwart few turn out. And we have an attendance record of around about a dozen to 20 people, possibly a little more than that for most walks. As part of that, as part of our activities, and as part of the Walkers Are Welcome initiative, which was the driving force between the soon-to-be inaugurated Tybee Valley Trail, Walkers Are Welcome communities up and down the length of the Tybee Valley came together as a group, Walkers Are Welcome group, and we are currently surveying, marking out the trail. We are endeavouring that it will all take place on public rights of way, so we should face few, if any, problems from land ownership, although we will have some. There's work to be done, there's physical work to be done in making sure it's clear, even on public rights of way, and we have to make doubly sure that the public are safe and secure at every step of the way. And there's a lot of work to be done with the emplacement of the installation of bridges and stiles and gates and waymarkers and so on. We will be doing this. We are doing this at this moment in time. And we are a small group calling itself the Tybee Valley Trail Association, meet on a monthly basis, or more frequently if they need to. That's becoming more regular now, to put the details together. We are in process of producing a narrative for a leaflet, which will ultimately become a longer booklet, descriptive booklet. We will be advertising the trail, and are advertising the trail verbally, as being part of a circumnavigation of Ceredigion, because we'll join up with the coastal path leading south into Pembrokeshire, the Ceredigion coast path leading north to Borth, and then returning to Strata Florida or to Tivy Pools for those who wish to go. It is meeting its problems along the way. We fully expected this. There are physical obstacles to overcome. There are social problems to overcome. There's communication with the farming community whose land we pass through. And though we are using public rights of way, we hope along its entire length, we will meet and are meeting difficulties with the agricultural community, inevitably. But we'll get there.
It's good to hear that it's happening, and it's good to see that it will be launched soon. For the record, this is not the first time the Walkers Are Welcome communities along the Tavy Valley have worked together. I seem to remember something happening last year in terms of the communities working together. Is that correct?
Last year?
Yes, last year.
Oh, dear me, my memory.
Who can forget that one day on a big mountain?
Oh, good gracious me.
Tell me a little bit about the build-up to that. Because it was a build-up, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
It was a two-year build-up with big ambitions, big targets.
Yeah.
Tell me about, because that was really the first real time that the Walkers Are Welcome communities got to work together on one little project with massive benefits. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well,
from start to finish, if you can.
It was a big project. You're referring to Pimlimon. Thank you.
Yes. Do you remember the title of the walk?
Yes, I will. If I might have jogged my memory. 100. Oh gosh. Cantera Copa. It was a splendid project. I have to say, it was a splendid project in its concept. Its concept took a lot of realisation, a lot of organisation, principally on your part, I have to say. But it came together well. The Walkers Are Welcome communities and the walking clubs associated did come together very well, and the object was to find 100 people to the summit of Pimlimon in support of Eisteddfod, which we did. The organisation went on for was pursued for many months. The communities came together, and within those communities, individual organisations helped latterly towards the end. For example, our local spa shop contributed bottles of water and bananas and silly things like that, but all of which were useful in a practical sense, valuable in a practical sense, but much more important, it demonstrated community spirit, I think. And this was demonstrated throughout the entire period of the organisation of this event.
I'm conscious you've got sun coming through your eyes there.
Oh, don't worry.
Which I can edit out anyway. Is that better?
Yeah, that's fine, thank you. Are we still running?
So, the big build-up to Cantera Copa.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us what happened on the day.
Well, I'll tell you what happened before the day, because each of the Walkers Are Welcome communities and the associated walking clubs had to ensure that they knew what they were doing. We have to remember that this is a mountain. This is the highest point in Ceredigion, and regardless of the weather, it's not going to be the same as it was on the coast or in the lowlands. So each of the Walkers Are Welcome communities had to send their representatives to prospect the walk. The route that we chose is the shortest, perhaps the most brutal, but it's the shortest of the routes from the shores of Nantamorch. And on the days before, it was beautiful weather during the entire week before, absolutely glorious weather. The week after was quite nice. But on the day that we went there, you would not, unless you absolutely had to, have taken anybody to the summit of Pimlimon. It was a ghastly day. The wind blew, it was raining, it was unseasonally cold. However, approximately 100 people set off. Very few peeled away on the way up, some by design and purpose or other commitments. But we did succeed in getting our 100 people, give or take a few, to the summit on that day, and we sat down and we ate our picnic and we had our photographs taken in conditions which were pretty appalling. It was very slippery on the way down, and safety was paramount, and those representatives from walking clubs, walkers of welcome communities, had to ensure that they were ushering their respective and individual groups safely up and safely down. And because the weather was so bad and the visibility was deteriorating throughout, we found that instead of going up in groups, we had to do it as a long crocodile, with each group being invisible within visible distance of the group before and the group after. But we made it, and we returned to the car park at Nantamorch as the sun came out and provided us with a brilliant conclusion to the day.
Tell us about the send-off we had.
The send-off was absolutely brilliant. We had a number of speeches from notables from the communities, but more than that, we had a musical send-off which was second to none. It was absolutely glorious. A local choir came along and just simply sang a few songs, but it set the scene, it set the day, and I believe that it provided the inspiration for those groups that would have said to them, look boys, it doesn't matter about the weather, let's just get on and do this and set out to achieve what we intended to achieve. And I think that those few little songs at the start
and
splendid.
It was a case of like a bit of an anthem, I felt, at the beginning of the walk, a rousing
yes.
rendition of Savon and a Bwlch. We will stand together in this tricky situation.
Yeah.
And it was a tricky situation, but thankfully we had Meibion and Mynydd, the local male voice choir, join us. They'd agreed to, and many of them actually joined us on the walk, and had also raised money. So Cant ar Copa should go down in the history of the Cambrian Mountains, and certainly the history of Pimlimon Mountain itself. Now then, if you could describe this part of the world to anybody who hasn't been here, how would you describe this part of the world?
Are you talking now of the Cambrian Mountains?
Yes,
okay. The Cambrian Mountains are, I'd like to say that the Cambrian Mountains are in recovery. When I first came here in 1976, because many of the reserves, or some of the nature reserves that were my responsibility, are located in or close to, on the fringe of the Cambrian Mountains. But as you will appreciate, wildlife conservation and conservation management is in the upland situation, is very rarely about managing a patch of land which is bounded by a fence or a physical boundary. That is sometimes the case in the lowlands. In the uplands, fencing is less frequent. There is much more open country. So much of my job and that of my colleagues was to liaise with the local farming community for the greater management of the Cambrian Mountains, in which there were located national nature reserves. So we had to pursue quite a lot of liaison work. Now, my impression of the Cambrian Mountains at that time was one of upland grassland, wooded valleys, wooded lowlands, fairly intensive agriculture, but to be critical of decades, centuries even, of overgrazing, I saw much of the Cambrian Mountains as something of a desert, a green desert. This is not to say that overgrazing has been entirely to blame. It's been largely to blame, but not entirely. There's little doubt about the fact that the Cambrian, with the national sheep flock being what it was in years gone by, that the Cambrian mountains have been grossly overgrazed. Unfortunately, what that takes away are those plants which are palatable to sheep. Therefore, diversity is removed, and what is left are those which are unpalatable. In the case of the Cambrian mountains, this is Molinia, purple moorgrass, where in areas where it's dry, and rushes, juncus, where in wetter areas, and a number of other unpalatable grasses. Diversity will return. The sheep flock has been reduced in Wales, so diversity will return. I hope it will take time. But there is another factor which has been here and with us since the Industrial Revolution and continues so. Airborne nitrogenous fertilizers, I don't mean fertilizers, I mean nutrients, are being carried from eastern parts, and this is a rather curious feature of this part of the world. Though we're dominated by westerly winds, at certain times of the year the easterly wind blows, mainly during the summer months, and this brings nitrogenous nutrients which are deposited on the Cambrian mountains and which are slowly but surely encouraging the rapid growth, the intensive growth of the plants which are least attractive and least diverse, particularly Molinia, purple moorgrass, which is a problem. Having said that, we all have to remain confident, hopeful, that the Cambrian mountains will recover its flora. I hope that the farming community, as well as reducing the sheep flock, will allow woodland to return in the valleys. I see very sadly today isolated copses of hawthorn which have survived being cut down for no obvious or apparent reason, just to take them down. That seems unnecessary. These are valuable small trees, and no substitute are the former Forestry Commission plantations of spruce or larch. They do not take the place of native trees. So I would like to see the more sheltered valleys recolonising with native trees in the fullness of time. It will take time, a lot more time than I have, I'm afraid, but hopefully it will begin. It is beginning.
What's the best thing about living here?
Oh,
what's the best thing about living here?
I have to take a very personal view here.
I hope so.
Yeah, the best thing. I've been very fortunate in my life in that I was born and raised in North Yorkshire, and for much of my early life I lived in a rural community, and from my relatively early childhood, my passion was that outdoors in which I lived. I lived for a time in Scotland. I was at college in Scotland in the countryside, mainly studying forestry. I went to South Devon and lived on Dartmoor. I have lived here, and I just delight in living among my passion. So my passion is much wider than just Cors Caron, but clearly I can delight in what is on my doorstep because it is just one step across the road from where I live.
Tell me about your favourite places then, other than Cors Caron in the Cambrian Mountains. Give me a couple of, maybe 3 or 4 places you'd recommend, but are your favourite, and maybe why they're great places to visit.
The Cambrian Mountains are blessed with many wet areas, some of which are rather bleak, and because of the reasons I've just been talking about, are somewhat impoverished. However, among them there are valley woodlands, and where those valley woodlands have been relatively undisturbed, I'm thinking of the RSPB woodlands at Gwenfrwd, places like that, which are just a delight. This is often described as Welsh or Western rainforest, and where they have been undisturbed, they are close to perfection. There are many other wetlands which have been on the fringes, particularly of the Cambrian mountains, which have been protected as nature reserves, not necessarily by the national authority, but by local trusts and so on. I delight in these. So, for me, the Cambrian mountains have always been a delight because of their diversity. I have been a little critical over their condition at the present time because of the reasons I've just given. But with recovery, they will blossom yet again. And for me, mountains have always been a delight, and I guess that I learned some of my mountaineering passion on Dartmoor. But the Cambrian Mountains, and indeed Snowdonia, and the other mountainous areas in Wales have been my delight these many, many years.
If I could ask you to choose one high point in the Cambrian Mountains near where you live, where you would say you feel as though you're on top of the world, where would you say you were?
I think Pumlummon possibly would rank supreme in that, and yet having said that, it's quite possible for me, and we do this regularly within the walking club, we need drive nowhere. We need park in Tregaron, and we can take a walk onto low summits just outside of Tregaron and enjoy some of those the most fabulous views ever.
Are you familiar with any local traditions? Any aspect of local life that signifies this part of Wales even?
Well, yes, of course. Having become absorbed by the community and integrated into the community, it's not possible to avoid such things. I was very closely involved for many years with one of our local events, Fargaron. I hope that it will return. It's gone into abeyance at this moment in time for all manner of reasons, but I hope that it will return. This is a very old fair granted by Edward the whatever. I can't remember which one, but it's a medieval fair, which was a hiring fair, was a trading fair, latterly succeeded by the drovers and others beyond. And therefore, historically, it has been very significant. It has become a fair. We no longer hire and fire. It has been succeeded by our weekly mart, of course, which was part of it, the trading part of the fair. But I would like to see the jollification that comes with an annual event of that sort return. And I hope I will continue to work with the local council to see that happens. Indeed, we have ample room at this moment in time in Tregaron to make a lot more of that by expanding it into a much bigger event.
Tell me about your role there, therefore, in recent times with Fargaron.
With 2 or 3 other stalwarts, we set it up. When I first joined the small committee, I hesitate to use that word committee, but the small group that organised it, there were 4 or 5 or 6 of us perhaps who sat down at the beginning of during the autumn of each year to plan it. It was a spring event, and we began our planning in the autumn. Little by little, we lost support. I suspect that a younger generation of Tregaronians were less interested in the kind of thing that we were trying to promote and put on, and therefore help, assistance, interest declined a little. Latterly, I think we have been reduced to just 2 or 3 people trying to put on what is a big event. Physically, that has been too much. Organisationally, it has been a little too much, and I think that what we will be looking for in the years to come will be more support from the community at large, indicated support, willingness to come along and help physically, organisationally, and so on. And I would like to think that it won't happen this year, but maybe as soon as next year or the year after, we'll be looking towards putting on another such event.
Tell me about any other local events which you've contributed to or attended over the last many years.
Yeah, many years. Many years ago, not in the wake of anything else, but we founded. Excuse me, I'll have to have another drink of water. We set up an organisation in succession to a local authority organisation, remind me.
Wheeler Porthmin?
No, not our name. Communities First.
Communities First.
We succeeded Communities First. They provided a service within the community and a small office in the Memorial Hall. Funding was withdrawn from Communities First and it was effectively closed down, but the local authority said you may keep what we have, provided that you're prepared to pay the rent for the office accommodation, and so Wheeler and Porthmin was born. It provided the same services that Communities First had been responsible for, and they expanded that. Information, tourist information, services of an administrative form of one sort or another. We had equipment that we could hire or loan to local people, setting up events of their own, and we continued to do this. We had photocopying facilities, computer provision for those who wished to log on for their support, and we ran these services for many years. However, with the advent and development of technology, most people run around the place these days with a mobile phone in their pockets, and they can do all this for themselves. So our computer services fell into abeyance. We no longer required them, and little by little, the services that we provided in Wheeler and Porthmin proved themselves to be semi-redundant. Now, within the community, we have retained all of the facilities, including a couple of computers, that we held as Wheeler and Porthmin. These remain available for people who wish to give me a phone call and say that they would like to make use of them. They're still available. Wheeler and Porthmin has closed formally and officially just this year, just a couple of months ago, but these facilities remain available for anybody who wants them.
Any local stories, interesting facts about this area where you live? What would you say are the unique local stories? The characters, historical events, maybe?
Well, a classic among them, I suppose, is your good self in the form of Tumshon Catty.
Tell me what you know and think about Tumshon Catty. The floor is yours.
Yeah. Tumshon Catty, yes, a local rogue, perhaps one might say, compared, likened unto perhaps a Welsh Robin Hood robbing the rich to forget to pay the poor. But he was a character historically. He has lived on as a character into modern times, he finished his life as a wealthy man, I understand, having come good, having risen to high places, both here and elsewhere in London. So he began he came from humble beginnings, I believe, and was, for want of a better word, something of a highwayman, although I think perhaps that's overstating it just a little bit. He did all of those things. He was a rogue, but he was a charitable rogue, and at the end of the day he left a legacy for this community, for this area, which was a very worthy one. Notable also, I think, was Tregaron's role in the droving tradition and industry, where this was a great gathering point for people driving their stock from the lowlands of Western Wales across the Cambrian mountains on foot, droving to the markets at the other side of the Cambrian mountains in Western England and beyond, indeed. Many were driven to the markets in London, I believe. One hell of a long way to drive animals, but in support of the drovers and the industry, this became very much of an important market town, and I believe it has boasted in its history as many as 14 pubs and hostelries. So many were provided for by this community, which would have been equivalent in size and population, I suppose, to what we see here today. Perhaps 1,200-1,400 souls are living in this community, and I don't think it would be very much less in those earlier days.
In terms of historical sites in and around Tregaron, which would you say are the most significant, or to you possibly, or to the visitor?
Well, paramount among these perhaps will be Strata Florida, just at the other end of the bog, the northern end of the bog, in the village of Pontwood Ventigide. This has been a very important site, a monastery, a church, and excavations of recent times are revealing much more about its history. Equally so, the Havard estate, the Johns estate, was very important in its day, the Trouscoid estate, the Lisburn estate. These were owners, estate owners, who had come from elsewhere, having made money, many of them in the mills of Western England, established estates here. Those estates now are largely in decline or have gone. Some of them taken over by the former forestry commissioner, planted up with trees, but most of them are still are historic sites in the first place, and particularly places like the Havard estate, which is a place I love to walk in. It's got many tracks and trails which can be followed. It's very popular, and much of it remains very remote, and is great for wildlife, for those wishing to visit for that purpose.
What about any archaeological sites you might have visited? Standing stones, cairns, hill forts, even anything? Yeah. Any of these places stick out in your mind?
Well, one that sticks out in my mind is just on the doorstep, in celebration of Eisteddfod. One of the nicest things that came out of that event was our very own standing stone circle.
To tell me a little bit about the day of building that stone circle, because I know you were there.
I was there for a time.
Point.
Yes,
yeah.
I was.
Yeah.
The stones for this circle were contributed by local landowners, and each one is commemorated on one of the stones, the names of all the donors of the stones. And I I think this is perhaps the best thing to have come out of that very, very notable event here in Tregaron, because it's permanent. These are upright stones. They have been established in the fine tradition of stone circles. They have been set in concrete, but they have to be in order to stand up, and they will stand there for a very long time to come in commemoration of the community and the part played by the community in this annual event. I don't know how often Eisteddfod has been to Tregaron, perhaps just...
It's the first time.
It was the first,
yes,
was it?
It was the first time.
Yeah.
So such was the significance of choosing Tregaron.
Yeah.
Of course, the Eisteddfod is linked to the Cantar Coppa walk as well.
Indeed.
Without the Eisteddfod coming to Tregaron, there would not have been a Cantar Coppa.
No.
It would not have been the four communities working together on that, and quite possibly the Tavy Trail might have not emerged as quickly in terms of evolution.
Yeah.
But yeah, the stone circle will remain there forever.
Yeah.
What did you do on the day of the building of the stone circle?
I came and watched for a while. I didn't do much physically because much of it had to be done by machines. But yes, I came along and I watched and I mingled and I talked to the people who were there, and I hope that my presence there might have provided a little bit of enthusiasm or encouragement or something. So my part in the establishment of the stone circle was passive, but I simply wanted to be there to be a part of what I think has been a very, very significant moment in Tregaron's history. And as you a moment ago you mentioned much more historic locations. This is one more. This is one in a succession of historic events which have created hill forts, cairns, monuments, things which have been erected in the Cambrian mountains over centuries now, and which are part and parcel of our collective history.
Tourism is a hot topic at the moment in many fields of discussion. What experiences have you had with regards to tourism and tourists in the Tregaron area?
Well, tourism, of course, is part and parcel of conservation management in many respects, because many of our nature reserves in particular, and the Cambrian Mountains are wide open, of course, in that respect, people are more nature, wildlife conscious, I think, than ever before in Britain. It has to be said, very sadly, that Great Britain is perhaps one of the least nature rich countries in the world. We have harvested, we have pillaged, we have raped even our countryside. We have replaced lots of it with alien plants, and consequently our wildlife is very, very impoverished. And I have to say, very sadly indeed, that trend is continuing. I know this through my own researches in the insect world, that the graphs are pointing vertically downwards for many species at the present time. That's not to say that all is lost and that we should be despondent about it.
In terms of tourism, then, therefore, do you think there's a risk to nature tourism with this decline, or?
I think the opposite in many respects. I think if nature is to survive, it must enjoy public support, and tourism will play a big part in that in the future. Sites like Cors Caron do provide facilities for visitors, boardwalk facilities, information facilities. Many more nature reserves do the same, and the Tavy Trail will do the same thing. I'm pressing NRW at this moment in time to assist us with some information panels, because I think this is the kind of thing that we need to do, and there will be information panels along. They will be installed along the length of the Dyfed Trail as and when this becomes established. I think that tourism is an up-and-coming industry. No, it's not. It's been up-and-coming for a very long time. It's rising steeply in its impact and with the wealth that it will bring to rural communities. So nature tourism, I think, will be very, very important for the future of wildlife and the recovery of our natural world.
What do you think about tourists coming to this part of Wales?
I think tourists coming to this part of Wales bring their wealth. I'm not in the least bit pessimistic about this. Indeed, I consider it to be very, very important. Tourism here, I guess, tourism in Wales began in the Victorian era with the coming of the railway. But because the railways only came to North Wales and South Wales, they got the benefit. And it was only with the coming of the railway along the coast and latterly the Mid Wales lines that tourism expanded to the rest of Wales. Now, people these days don't travel by train quite so much. They travel by road, and the road network here is perfectly adequate for increasing tourism, allowing for some traffic jams here and there, which occur all the time. But in a nutshell, I believe that tourism is vital for the future economy of Wales as a whole, and this area in particular.
And if a tourist came knocking on the front door now and said, "Take me somewhere in the Cambrian Mountains," where would you take them today?
For two reasons. Oh, now I'm going to be critical here now. I would take them. I think I would take them to two places, very close at hand. I would take them to Strata, Florida, because there's a huge historic interest there and a cultural interest there because of what the residents of the ancient residents of Strata, Florida did and their impact. I would take them to Havod as well, because that's just beautiful. But I would take them up to Dyfed Pools. Now, Dyfed Pools is a very bleak landscape. But in that bleak landscape, there is a stark beauty. I'd like to take them up twice. Once on a vile day when it's not very nice at all, and once on a fine day when it's beautiful. But I would also like to show them something that I would do with deep regret, and that is those are the scars that are being created at the present time by overburdensome tourism. We've got to be cautious about tourism. If we just simply invite all and sundry here, they will come and they will impose damage. And I was up at Dyfed Pools not too many weeks ago marking out the Dyfed Trail, and I was horrified by what I saw as the results of off-road vehicles really causing a huge amount of damage up there. There has to be some control. Places must be set aside for people who wish to pursue those interests, but they should not be allowed to do it over the countryside as a whole. The Cambrian Mountains have a stark and rather wonderful beauty, and I think that this must be protected as they go through the process of recovery.
Tell me about local employment opportunities in the Tregaron area.
They're a bit sparse, I fear. Agriculture, which has been the traditional employer for many years, of course, doesn't employ anymore because everything is done by machine. The same applies to the forestry industry to a lesser degree. To a lesser degree, but only just. Much of that now is mechanised in a big way. So employment opportunities in the Tregaron area, I think, are fairly sparse. And as a consequence of that, I guess there is a younger generation, has been a younger generation and continues to be a younger generation that is becoming obliged to move elsewhere in order to find employment. This is part and parcel of the process of education. Education facilities are improving and enhancing, and as more and more people receive a tertiary education, they are seeking employment in their particular fields of endeavour, and inevitably, almost inevitably, they will be elsewhere. So, hard times for young people, perhaps, who are resident and are likely to remain resident in these rural communities like Tregaron, because employment facilities, opportunities are few.
To you, what does heritage mean in terms of this community?
I think heritage is... I've always been of the view that history is very, very important. It is where we came from. It is what we are. We are what we've made ourselves. And what we've made ourselves is writ in the history books. So heritage, I think, is something that everyone should perhaps be aware of. People coming into the area to live, to work, to dedicate their lives really should become aware of heritage, and it's all around us. We've spoken of hill forts, we've spoken of history, we've spoken of Tumshon Catty, we've spoken of the drovers, we've spoken of everything that has made Tregaron what it is today, and in a nutshell, that is heritage. We can't ignore it, we can't turn our backs on it, we can't make it go away. It is what we are.
Remind me again, when you moved which year did you move to the area?
76.
Which part of that year?
January.
So you remember the summer of 76?
Oh, I do.
Tell me something about, because I have my own story and I might share it with you later, but tell me about your experiences, summer of 76 in the Tregaron area.
There's one incident which sticks out in my mind more clearly than almost any other. I was feeling my way in 1976. I was a stranger. I'd come to, I was going to say a strange community, but it's me that was strange, not the community. I was struggling a little bit in that first year. And then something happened. And it was a fire on the remote West Bog of Coastal. The cause was never known, but it was considered that on the western side of the bog, in a hedgerow, a piece of broken glass, the sun had been shining through a piece of broken glass, we had set fire, this was August, set fire to some dry vegetation which had crept down the hedgerow and got into the vegetation on the surface of the bog. It was a very dry year. The water table on Coastal was lower than had ever been known for in recorded time. The fire got into the peat, started to burn the peat. It burned for 3 to 4 weeks in the peat, and while clearly it is impossible to get machinery of any sort out there, the fire had to be controlled using beaters, using water locally if we could get it, but mainly just watching and beating. And I spent many days and many nights out there in an exhausted state, once in a collapsed state, unfortunately, and I could have been overwhelmed by the fire. But the problem with the fire having got into the peat, that it burned slowly through the peat, unseen, and every now and again a small volcano would erupt, and then it would start to burn the vegetation again. So this was the big event for me of 1976. When I came here, the public were not permitted onto the. There were no boardwalks in those days, so there was very limited access along the abandoned railway. So, that was my big event.
That's interesting, because we'll all, those of us who remember 76 will remember something of interest. But you touched on something there which was of interest to me. You mentioned there were no boardwalks on Cors Caron, and that there was only the access via the railway.
Yes.
At what point, or what was the decision making around increasing access to Cors Caron?
This was more than just local. This was a British national decision that was taken, that these sites, national nature reserves, are owned by the country. They are therefore owned by you and me, the taxpayer, and therefore the organisation, the Nature Conservancy in its day, were duty bound to provide safe access, safe in the sense of secure to the visitor, safe in the sense of secure to the wildlife for which the nature reserve had been declared. So more and more and more nature reserves from round about that year, I would say, the late 70s certainly, were becoming opened up. So access to Cors Caron at that time was by permit only. So we issued permits to people who had a specific reason for wishing to enter there. This wasn't tourism, this was people who wished to pursue a research project or pursue a particular interest. But at that time it became, a decision was taken that access had to be allowed to national nature reserves generally, selectively perhaps. Cors Caron was perfect for those purposes, and so the first short boardwalks were established, and the public was invited to come and make use of them, and this had been pursued ever since. They have been extended, and information is provided, and the public continue to make use of them.
And I understand the bridges have been built as well, yes, across the River Tavy. Legend has it that too many people went on one of these bridges. Do you know of that legend?
This is. This is. I don't know if there are anybody left around who would recall. This was a little bit before my time. Legend has it, in fact, it's more than legend, that a group of ladies from the local WI were being afforded on one of the early boardwalks, were being afforded a guided tour of the reserve, and that took them onto a bridge which was somewhat insecure at the time, would never have been allowed today, of course. And while a number of the ladies were standing on the bridge listening to their guide, who was telling them about what they were looking at, the bridge unhappily collapsed and dropped them all into the River Tavy, which was very low in water at that time, as it was midsummer. But there was an equal event where I was leading a tour of ladies from the same WI, on the southern end of the bog, and one of them slipped from the side of a ditch and became very firmly anchored in the mud at the bottom of the ditch, and it took several of us to heave this unfortunate lady, who took it all in very good part, I'm bound to say. She submerged pretty well to the waist in the mud at the bottom of the ditch. She emerged smiling. These incidents occur, and they will continue to occur, and I hope that anyone who becomes is the unhappy victim perhaps of such an incident will emerge smiling, as all of the ladies in the two incidents I've just mentioned did and would not say, I'm going to take you all to the cleaners and so on.
As a result of increasing access on somewhere like Corscaron, what changes have you seen over the years?
Well, yes, the great danger in inviting the public to a place like Corscaron is that there will be damage. And the most severe likely damage in the spring of the year, early summer of the year, is from fire. We traditionally on nature reserves, in my experience, fire beaters would be placed at locations where if a fire should occur, someone could seize them and assist in putting the fire out. That of course puts people in the face of hazard, and this is generally speaking frowned upon these days. We prefer to use publicity. We prefer to say, please be cautious. If you must smoke, please don't chuck your cigarette ends away. So the changes have been advisory rather than practical. We produce literature for nature reserves throughout which provide advice on what to do, etiquette, practice, the correct attitude when entering a nature reserve, and these seem to work perfectly well. So changes are informative rather than practical.
Tell me then about the increase in footfall over the years and what impact that has had.
The increase in footfall has been considerable. It has been encouraged, and it has to be encouraged because the public have a right to those facilities. But the increase in footfall has got to be good. It must be beneficial to both the footfaller and the reserve itself. And as I said a moment ago, we do this through publicity. Footfall has increased very, very considerably since the late 70s, early 80s. It is increasing. People use the reserve and its facilities and its boardwalks to walk their dogs, to walk their children, to walk. And there is increasing encouragement, public encouragement to the public to get out. It's healthy, it's good, and we, the organisations, encourage people not only to do that, but to record what they see. And we do receive information. Sometimes it's complaint, sometimes it's positive, sometimes I saw a funny whatever. Can you tell me what it was? So my reaction to increasing footfall is not one of alarm, but one of considerable benefit. And I believe it's to benefit all round. And as more and more people want to get out to see more and more of the countryside, we should be and must be prepared to open up these locations.
In terms of Tregaron and where you live, if you could change anything, if you had a magic wand, what would you change about where you live?
I'm not sure that I would want to change anything. Where I live has gone through a long historic evolutionary process. I have lived here since 1976, and during those years, I have lived as part of that process. We all have, of course. It would be nitpicking to wave my magic wand and say I'd like to see that done and that done and that done. I would rather put
Why don't you? You've got a chance today now to nitpick. If you want to improve the quality of life for yourself and others, make Tregaron a better place, what would you do with that wand?
I think yes. I look at this. I think I find it difficult to look at that prospect because of my age, my time of life. My years are advancing now, and I don't have that much time left to... I'm not sure what I'm saying, actually. This is... Gosh. I don't know why I find that such a difficult question. What would
You've been here quite a few years.
I have.
You've seen things come, you've seen things go, you've seen big moments, you've seen small events. If you could walk around the town, for example, or hover above in a helicopter and say, right, I'd do this, that, and the other to make this place a better place. Or are you just content?
I want to avoid the risk of being complacent. I'm content, perhaps. Nothing is perfect, and I wouldn't like to see Tregaron evolve into some kind of small garden city, because that would be too artificial. This is a rural community, and I'd like to see some of the things that are currently being worked upon. I know that there are plans for that little patch of green behind the spar and across the river to be developed. That would be nice. There are little green patches like that which could be developed into something slightly prettier. No, I don't mean prettier. Perhaps I do. I don't think I would ever see Tregaron as a picture postcard, large village, small town. That isn't what Tregaron is. Tregaron is a working community, a working rural community, and therefore I would expect that to be the case, warts and all, almost.
Okay, I'll throw a little curveball your way.
Please do.
You've mentioned Coscaron about 50 million times so far in this recording, and I understand and appreciate that. And you've mentioned the fact that the nature reserve, Coscaron, is owned by the people.
Yes.
But how can the Coscaron be so close to Tregaron, yet so far away from the community in terms of accessibility?
Accessibility is restricted to the road system. It doesn't need to be, of course, because the abandoned railway runs into and through Tregaron. Alas, it's not available for pedestrian use just because of one small land ownership. Now, when the railway closed down in 1965-66, those sections of the railway that ran beyond the reserve boundary through farmland were passed into private ownership by default. They were not purchased, to my knowledge, but simply by default. One of those land ownerships, unfortunately, is unwilling to entertain the restoration or the return to public use, even community ownership. And therefore that section of railway, which could be used for pedestrian access, I mean, this is something we've been pressing for years and years and years, and my own attitude towards the way forward would be compulsory purchase. That has been suggested many times. I mean, this would of course provide pedestrian access, ready pedestrian access, so if my magic wand were able to do that, then perhaps that's one way I would use it.
I might well be holding that magic wand with you on that case.
Yes.
Finally, and thank you for your time this morning as well. If you were asked in Aberystwyth where you were from, what would you say?
Where was I from? Now, you would have to define that, because I am not a Tregoronian. I have lived here since 1976. I am a Yorkshireman, and I remain a proud Yorkshireman. So I suppose I am from Yorkshire.
Thank you. And if you were wandering the streets of London, middle of the day, and were asked in London where were you from, where would you say you were from?
I would say I was from Tregaron, because I see that question in two quite separate contexts. One, where were you from in terms of origin, and you're in a strange place, you're away from home, where are you from, where is your home? So my home is Tregaron.
And if I were to fly you to New York, and somebody said to you in Manhattan, where are you from, sir? Where would you say you were from? I
would qualify it. I'd have two locations from which I was. But I think the answer to the question would be my second one. I would assume it to be, where are you from now? And therefore I would say, I have come from Ceredigion, from Tregaron.
To an American.
To an American.
Thank you for answering the questions this morning. Is there anything else you'd like to add to the recording?
Only to wish it good fortune. The Cambrian Mountains and Tregaron, of course, are close to my heart these days, having been here for all these years. I've lived here for a great deal longer than I have lived anywhere else in my life, of course, including my childhood years. So this is where I anticipate that I shall remain for most, if not the rest, of my years. So Tregaron and the Cambrian Mountains are close to my heart. So I'm not sure if that answers the question in any way. This is where I am. This is where I shall be. And this is where I fully expect to remain.
Ian, Tillotson, thank you for your time this morning.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it, and for answering the questions so honestly. And I'm sure many people will appreciate your time and have great interest in what you've said. Thank you.